Hey guys, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a comparison video for you. I've got two Chris Reeve knives today, the 31 and the Inkosi. You guys are probably well aware of my love for the Inkosi. That does continue, but I thought I was curious for sure to compare these side by side, and I figured many others would be as well. So I won't spend a lot of time on size and weight because everyone's familiar with the size of the 21, and nothing has really changed in that regard. Just a quick overview. These are a little over 8 inches long, basically 3.5-inch blade, and about 4 inches of grip area. So nothing crazy. Everyone's probably familiar with most of those numbers. The one difference is going to be weight. The 31 is going to be like the 21, coming in closer to 4 ounces. The inlaid one here weighs like 4.3 ounces, so I suspect that extra weight is because of the inlays. The Inkosi, as it is here, is just under 5 ounces, so basically we'll just call it 5 ounces. So on a standard TI version, you're probably looking at about an ounce difference, a little less than an ounce between these two. I will say, as you pick these up, you can notice, okay? Now, again, for me, this is not a big deal. I always carry bigger, heavier knives, and 5 ounces isn't even what I consider heavy. But there is a mild difference in the weight. All right, so that's really the only, in terms of size, weight, and carry, they're going to be essentially the same, other than the Inkosi is going to weigh just a little bit more. Blade, let's talk about blade. That's a little more interesting, and we got a little bit more of a difference happening. Now, here is a substantial difference, but we're going to, I'm going to talk more about the standard blade shape. We got sort of a drop-ish clip point blade, crown spine on both. You can see the standard jimping on the 31, well, it's got that more aggressive, heavier jimping on the Inkosi. Double lug versus single lug. Thinner blade stock. If you put these two side by side, make sure this is going to focus for me while I'm doing this. There you go. You can see there is a substantial difference in the blade stock, with the Inkosi being a little bit thicker there. And then finally, there's a difference in the way these two are ground. So this is going to be a hollow grind, fairly thin behind the edge, and fairly aggressive hollow grind. What they have on the Inkosi is what they call a large hollow grind, and that grind is going to be a little bit thicker. It's still going to be hollow. That is, there's still going to be a concave shape to this bevel. It's just not going to be quite as aggressive as the depth on this one. And with that thicker blade stock, you end up with a substantially more robust blade. However, my experience is that this still cuts really, really well. Both of these, by the way, are going to have a convex secondary bevel, so that's something to take note of when you go to sharpen this. That's not a difference, so we won't spend a lot of time on that particular point. But the blades, the difference essentially is that this one maximizes toughness a little more. This one maximizes sliciness a little more. And so depending on what you want, by the way, this is no slouch. It's not like this blade is just going to break and fall apart at the first sign of any tough use or even the slightest bit of lateral force. That's not true at all. But the Inkosi is going to be a little thicker and just a little tougher. And that theme is kind of going to run throughout these knives, much like it did on the Inkosi versus the 21. Obviously, both of these are Chris Reeve's S35 VN, which is hardened to like 58, 59 Rockwell. That's a little soft for S35 VN, but that's the way Chris Reeve likes to do it, and he's not showing any sign of changing that. We may see a change to S45. Wow. S45 VN. We'll see what happens there. I don't know all the details. I know Chris Reeve was involved in the development of S35 VN. I don't know about that next generation of that steel. Is there a winner in terms of blade? Not particularly. For me, yes, I do like the slightly tougher, thicker blade of the Inkosi, but I also totally understand. I would argue it's not necessary. It's just, a little more satisfying for me personally. As an EDC blade, especially if you're going to do a little bit of food prep or need some extra slicing power, the 21 or the 31 may be the way to go for you. In terms of action, the first thing I'm going to do here is let you guys take a look at a disassembly video I did a little bit ago, and then we'll come back and talk about it. All right, so for part of our side-by-side comparison between the Inkosi and the 31, I thought I'd do a quick takedown. One of the joys of Chris Reeve knives is just how easy they are to take apart. So we're just going to pop these guys open. There we go. Okay, now that we've got these two apart, we can kind of spend a little time taking a look at the components. So a key difference between these two is going to be the bushing pivot. So on the Inkosi, you have the option of tightening the knife down as much as you want. On the 31, it preserves the bushing from the 21. So this little spacer right here allows just enough space for the washers, and then that's it. So when you tighten the knife down, it's kind of foolproof. You tighten it down until it's tight, and this bushing preserves the amount of space you need for everything to work the way that it's supposed to. Over here on the Inkosi, you have a larger bearing surface, all right, which I tend to be a bit of a fan of because of the extra stability it provides. But even then, even on the 31 here, look how large that bearing surface still is, right? So it's still bigger than 80% of the pocket knives out there. And this is one, you know, just for one simple example, when Zero Tolerance came out with the 0300s. This is supposed to be this heavy-duty, hard-use tactical knife that can do anything, and it has this little tiny washer that is nowhere near what the Sebenza is doing. And if there was one point, you know, there are a number of things that I think the rest of the industry could learn from Chris Reeve, but the larger washers are so nice and make add so much stability and longevity and just quality that I wish kind of everyone would go to that. So anything else really worth noticing internally? Not all that much. I mean, you can see there's quite a bit of similarity here. There's some differences, but it's, you know, nothing so outstanding that we need to have a major discussion about it. I will point out, in case, for those of you who had never looked, the hole here that you find on the 21 and on this 31 without the scales is still there. It's just in the case of the 31 with the overlays, you can, it's hidden by the overlay. All right. By the way, this has been taken apart. This knife, I'm going to stop this and clean all this stuff up because it's going to be incredibly boring. We're already 7 minutes in. But just to point out that this is pretty clean, and you can see there's a fair bit of fluorinated grease on here. So I'm going to clean that all off. I'm going to get it all nice back to sort of totally spotless. Then I'll reapply some fluorinated grease, and I'll probably add a little bit of KPL as well on the washer or the bearing surfaces. Okay, so now that you've had a chance to look at the internals here, you know that the washers are a little bit different. We know we've got a bushing on this, and we've got no bushing over here. Slightly different way of doing the stop pin, although this is a little bigger. They're very close to the same size. The pivot is a little bigger here, and the washer on the Inkosi is larger. Okay, so giving a little more stability. The action is very similar. You know, there's really not enough difference to comment anything meaningfully about it. The lock bar is pretty accessible on both. Both use the ceramic ball interface. The thickness, you can see, is a little different on the 31 versus the Inkosi. The lock bar tension is very close. Notice the single lug versus double lug here. That's, you can get a double lug 21, but you're gonna have to pay a little more for it, where the Inkosi comes standard with the double lug. In terms of, other than, now that you've seen the internals, in terms of practical differences in feel, it's very, very minimal. Again, everything on the Inkosi is just a little heavier, a little more overbuilt than on the 31. And that, again, that's the theme. The same is true of the titanium stock here as we move sort of into the handle. The titanium is a little thicker here. By the time you do the handle, the last Inkosi I had overlays, and I actually found it to be a little bit too thick for what I want from my Inkosi. It's not, it's nothing that Chris Reeve does is going to be as thick as, say, something like this, but it was a little bit thicker, and so when I had the opportunity, I moved out of that and went back to the standard TI, which I actually like a little bit better. Now on the 21 and the 31, I have to say these inlays do make a difference for ergonomics, at least in my experience. I've only handled a 31 in hand for a few minutes, but the 21s that I've had and been able to spend a little more time with are not as comfortable as this, and not as comfortable as this. Now I have to say, I've got to give some credit here where credit is due. I like the feel of this. I like the jimping. I like the thumb ramp. That's a little bit different. Notice the more aggressive ramp here, and the slightly thicker handle. Now I've got to say that the inlays here on the 31 do make it feel quite a bit different and really bring it into line, I would say, in terms of ergonomics. These are essentially equal rather than one being substantially different. The other thing I should point out is we've got a standoff back here where on the 31 there's sort of almost like a pivot style screw that goes through this spacer. Okay, so a little bit of a different way of achieving the same thing, or achieving essentially the same thing. Let's see, what have we missed here? I think that pretty well covers all of the main points that I wanted to hit. Overall, both of these are fantastic knives that are doing a really cool, very classic approach, very well put together. And I will say, what Chris Reeve is doing in terms of toughness and durability and longevity, no one is really doing the same type of thing, right? We have all these hard use knives, but often hard use just means thick blade stock and thick handle material without making any changes whatsoever to the hardware. And so really it's hard use in aesthetics only. It just looks bigger and bulkier, and nothing in terms of how the knife functions is actually bigger or bulkier. Where with Chris Reeve, you actually are getting parts that are more substantial than your average knife. And I think that's definitely worth noting. And it's worth noting not only for us as users, but for knife makers, right? What I want to see in a hard use knife is something where all the components are truly oversized and meant to last forever and truly take a beating rather than just thick blade stock. Okay, that's not the same thing as saying something is really hard use. All right. If you want a knife that's meant to use, that will do a great job for you and last forever, right? I think both of these are fantastic. For me, I still think the Inkosi is marginally better just based on my tastes. However, that really is a matter of taste. I would not try to make an argument that the Inkosi is sort of categorically better as an EDC than the 31. They're very, very equal. Yes, the Inkosi is a little more overbuilt, a little bit tougher. Both are going to be more overbuilt than practically anything else available on the market these days, with the exception of a couple I'm aware of. But both of these are doing something really, really cool in terms of their durability and their build quality. For me, again, the Inkosi still stands out as the one that I'm going to go with, especially with this Tonto blade. I really, really love this knife. But the 31 is no slouch, and whichever one you end up going with, I don't think you're going to go wrong, right? Chris Reeve has continued to do a great job. And by the way, you wouldn't do wrong. If I had here a 21, a 31, an Inkosi, and a 25, and probably an Umnumzon, you couldn't make a wrong choice out of that lineup. All right. So that's what I'm going to end with. Thanks a lot for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll talk to you soon.